Hello. Today, I'm providing an overview of the Sunstone CDDP-A user interface. I'll teach you how to use it, and maybe suggest how its features can help you become a superstar welder. But first, you should know this video is the second video in the setup series for the Sunstone CDDP-A. The first video focused on setup. This training video focuses on the user interface, how to make changes, how these settings adjust the weld, and more. You should probably complete the first setup video before proceeding with this instructional video. Ready? Okay. When you power on your Sunstone welder, and after the welder has completed startup, you'll see the home screen. At the top is the navigation bar. Use the navigation bar to access other screens and features. I'll get to the navigation bar and the never regions of the interface later, but for now, let's stay focused on the home screen. Under the navigation bar is a waveform, which graphically displays the current weld's energy waveform. Voltage is displayed on the y-axis. Time is displayed in milliseconds on the x-axis. Green and red lines indicate the lower and upper comparator values on the graph. Notice that the background color changes from gray to orange when the Weld On button is pressed and illuminated. Within the waveform, you'll see an information box, which displays the active weld schedule and the results from the last comparator. Under the waveform, you'll see three buttons: Pulse Settings, Comparator, and Control. Let's look at each of these more closely, because they're kind of important. Let's touch the Pulse Setting button. And then, let's back up a bit so you better understand pulse settings. Remember this: CDDP-A stands for Capacitive Discharge Dual Pulse, Advanced. The dual pulse part means the welder produces 2 pulses of energy with each weld. Each pulse can be adjusted and set independently, or even turned off. Pulse 1 is adjustable between 0.1 watt-seconds on the low side and up to 30% of the total weld energy on the high end. Pulse 1 preheats and prepares the metal for the weld. Pulse 2 can be adjusted from 0.1 watt-seconds up to 100% of the weld energy. A quick side note: Pulse 1 must be turned off if you want Pulse 2 to use 100% of the total weld energy, of course. Pulse 2 completes the weld. These toggle switches turn the pulse on and off for Pulse 1 or Pulse 2. Further below is where you adjust the pre-weld delay, which is the time between the trigger of a weld and the release of the energy, measured in milliseconds. In an automated production setting, the pre-weld delay helps trim the welder's part in the production process. You can also adjust the delay between Pulse 1 and Pulse 2 here, measured in milliseconds. For a particular weld, you may want the substrate to cool or the electrode to seat a bit better before firing Pulse 2. At the bottom of the screen is a simple dot. The dot indicates the welder charge state. A green dot means the welder is good to go and ready to release energy. A black dot means the welder is not ready, probably because the Weld On button is off. And a red dot means the welder's emergency stop safety feature is on. Or that zombies are at your door, but probably not. Okay, so let's get the welder ready to weld something cool. The first step is to enter the total energy for the weld. Touch the total stored energy box, and by using the slider, select the amount of energy you want. Remember, this number is the pool of energy that the 2 pulses will share. For example, if I enter 10 watt-seconds of energy and Pulse 1 is set to 2 watt-seconds, then Pulse 2 can be no higher than 8 watt-seconds. You can't spend more than you got, unless you're the government. A side note: the number of welds you can complete in a minute is dictated by the amount of energy being released in the weld. A weld with lots of energy requires more time for the capacitors to recharge than a weld with little energy. Thus, the lower the energy setting, the more welds you can complete in a given amount of time. Let's move on to comparators. In a nutshell, Sunstone's comparator feature is a quality control feature. If your welds must consistently fall between a given threshold, comparators will be your new best friend. Why? Because if a weld falls outside the threshold, you can choose to have your Sunstone welders stop and alert you to the error. Or just alert you to the error and not stop. When you touch the Comparator button, 3 new buttons appear: Peak Voltage, Peak Current, and Peak Power. Choose the comparator you wish to use. The small dots on each of these comparators will show the state of the previous weld. If the dot is green, the previous weld passed that comparator. Red alerts you to a failure. Obviously, these dots won't appear if there are no previous welds, right? Below the types of comparator are toggle buttons that allow you to choose to use the comparator on pulse 1 or pulse 2. Set the upper limit for pulse 1 or pulse 2, then set the lower limit for pulse 1 and pulse 2. The previous weld peak results, or last peak, are displayed here, and the bar will be green or red depending on the results of the previous weld. Green means the previous weld fell within the limits. Red means the previous weld failed to fall within the limits. Below the last peak is the Continue on Failure button, a very important feature, so listen carefully. If quality control is not paramount to the current application, then you may want to make sure this feature is on, so the welder continues to operate even if the last weld failed to fall within set limits. If quality control is paramount to the current application, meaning you want your Sunstone welder to stop if the last weld failed, then make sure this feature is off. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a bar graph representing all past welds. You'll see how many passed your set limits and how many did not. On the bottom right, you'll see a checkbox that allows you to see a histogram of the previous weld results. Touch this box to display a histogram of all welds and where they fall within established limits. The next and last button on the home screen is Control, which opens all the weld head control options, which are fully manual, auto with timing, and auto with trigger. If you are operating the weld head manually, touch and select the fully manual button. If you are operating the weld head automatically with a timer, touch and select the Auto with Timing button. If you are operating the weld head with a trigger, you guessed it, touch and select the Auto with Trigger button. Next, you can set how long you want the weld head to squeeze prior to welding, and then set the hold time after the weld is completed. Touch the appropriate box and enter the time in milliseconds. Next is the Roll Spot Control box. If you're using a roll spot handpiece, use this area to configure how the energy is released to the handpiece. Touch the Roll Spot button to enable or disable this feature. Touch the welds per second box and enter the desired number. Let's move on to the communications screen. Touch the Communications button to open and configure all PLC controls. If you're connecting your Sunstone welder to a PLC for automation, you'll enter all the inputs and pins here. Additionally, alarm settings, remote schedule selects, and importing and exporting weld information is completed in the communications screen. Let's be honest, PLC can get a bit complex, right? Sunstone recommends you consult the user's manual or call the Sunstone Customer Service Department to configure the welder correctly for PLC. Next is the media screen. In the media screen, you can view how-to videos and access the user manual and data sheet. If you look all the way to the bottom of the screen, you'll see two buttons. Touch the Download Latest Videos and Manuals to update the media library. You'll need a Wi-Fi connection to update. Touch the Delete All Videos and Manuals to empty the media library. The Save Load screen facilitates the loading and saving of different weld settings. Welders of all ages have their own secret sauce for a particular weld. With a Sunstone welder, you can save those settings, that secret sauce recipe, and access them at any time to get just the right results. The waveform you see displayed at the top of the screen represents the current weld setting. Other saved weld settings are displayed below as waveforms for easy recognition. You can display saved weld settings by date or alphabetically. Touch the Date button to sort by date. Touch the Alphabetical button to sort alphabetically. When saving a new weld setting, the one displayed at the top of the screen, touch the Enter Weld Name Here box and enter a name for the weld setting. Touch the Enter Notes on Weld Here box to enter any pertinent notes. Touch the Save as New button to give the current weld setting a new name. Touch the Load button to load a weld setting that has been selected in the list above. Touch the Save Over Selected Weld setting to save over an existing weld setting. Touch the Delete Selected Weld to remove a weld setting from your library. Okay, back to the navigation bar. The lock icon is the lock screen. Imagine that. Here you can lock the welder, so no changes can be made to the current weld setting as well as to any saved weld settings. There are two types of locks available. Full lock removes the ability to make any changes to the welder. Each screen will display current settings, but no settings can be changed. Limited lock removes the ability to make any changes to the welder with one exception. Previously saved weld settings can be loaded. This option is best when you need to weld something different. The welder will allow a different weld setting to be selected, but not allow any changes to be made to the weld setting, which is ideal on a production floor. Whomever is using the welder can select different settings for different jobs, but is unable to make changes to the settings. Touch the Toggle Lock mode to lock or unlock the welder. When you lock the welder, you'll be asked to enter a PIN. When you enter a PIN, you'll be asked to confirm the PIN. Use this PIN to unlock the welder later. If you forget the PIN, call Sunstone customer service for assistance in unlocking the welder. Writing the PIN on a sticky note and attaching it to the side of the welder is probably not a good idea. The final icon in the navigation bar is the settings screen. The settings screen is divided into two different sections: Interface and System. Touch the Interface button to select the language, adjust volume and screen brightness, and set the time and date. Touch the System button to restore defaults, clear the welder's memory, update the welder's software with a local USB drive, update the welder's software via Wi-Fi, or enter Test Suite. At the bottom of the screen, the system information for your welder is displayed, including the software versions. If you need to utilize any of these functions, carefully consult the user's manual or call Sunstone customer service for assistance. And we're done! As always, if you have any questions about your Sunstone welder, don't hesitate to call or text our customer service team at 801-658-0015. You can also send a quick email to support@sunstonewelders.com. Thank you for choosing Sunstone.